call this meeting of the Tacoma Park City Council to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Williams.
I'm here.
Councilmember Clay.
Here.
Councilmember Robinson.
Here.
Councilmember Stevens. Councilmember Snipper.
Here.
Councilmember Wright.
Here.
And Councilmember Siemens was here, and he will be back momentarily.
There he is, right there.
All right. I guess does anybody have any council comments? Councilmember Clay. It's all the sound man's fault.
Yeah, there's been some discussion again in Saska about the series of crosswalks painted across Sligo Creek Parkway. So I was hoping maybe the city manager could help with this some, because I've talked to the city council people and the county engineers. And so essentially, Sligo Creek Parkway has been repaved, and at one time there was a plan developed by the Department of Planning, the Montgomery County Park and Planning, that included raised crosswalks at the Jackson crossing, and I think maybe Aspen where the school buses are, and also at Heather. And the neighbors had long, and they haven't been willing to put in the raised crosswalks, and then they said we would revisit this after they paved, and of course then they're not there. So we've talked about this with Valerie Irvin for a while, because this is a big issue for the school kids who have to stand on the side of Sligo Creek Parkway and wait for their bus. And it's really difficult to cross at the main crossing there from Heather Avenue, where a lot of the neighborhood filters down and across. I'm very cautious going across there, and I've had people, charge at me, and it's just kind of crazy, weird, and scream at you because you're in the crosswalk. It's really exciting. But what I found out this week is that at some point during the unification process, which predates me, they had some agreement on specific points with the Park and Planning and the county regarding, among other things, a crosswalk that goes across at Hayward, what's called Hayward Extension. And after unification, it was painted on. They came out and they painted it on, and since then, they've told residents that they can't have it because it violates some national traffic safety standards. What I've been told by Council Member Irvin's office after she talked to the county engineers is that they don't want to put a crosswalk on a corner because of the visibility. And the last component of this, to continue to exacerbate the problem, is that when WSSC came out and did the roads there, they removed all the gravel that was on the shoulder of the road there, right between Hayward Extension and Heather, where everyone who went to the little kiddie park there parked, and they didn't put it back. And so apparently WSSC planted grass. I know that when WSSC deals with us, when they cut into anything that is the public right-of-way, they're not required to replace it unless it's a sidewalk, I think. All they have to do, they can dig up your azaleas and plant grass, for example. That happened on Elm Avenue. And they don't have any other liability, but I can't imagine that if WSSC doesn't have any liability, that the county doesn't want to replace the rock that's there, because it's not going to hold grass because everybody parks on it. It's all going to erode down into the creek, and it's a big muddy mess. So it's kind of a cleanup from the WSSC piece. And that's all I have for today.
Councilmember Robinson.
Last week, Nellie Moxley of the Pinecrest Neighborhood Association passed away, and I just want to kind of tip my hat to her, who she was, and all the things she did. I worked closely with her over the years on environmental issues and on neighborhood issues, both before I was on the council and after, also development issues in that area, and I found her to be in some ways thrilling to talk to, because her mind was wide open, and her mouth as well, and sometimes wide open, and she was a real adventure to have, and I considered her a friend, and I was very sad to hear that she had passed away. So I just want to say that we'll miss you, Nellie. I also I'm still processing my time at the ICLEI conference. You guys will hear me say this over and over. And in fact, tomorrow night I'm going to try to relay to the Committee on the Environment what some of the things that I learned and was exposed to at that conference. And I keep coming back to a couple of case studies that I came across at that conference about broad-based approaches on how to handle energy efficiency and things that are in the realm of the green. And I want us to consider how we're doing that in the city. And I don't, this isn't an agenda item, I'm just bringing it up during the council comments here to try to engender a conversation. And I'd like to see us have a serious conversation about how we on the council are interacting with our own constituents and all of the different groups in Tacoma Park to push forward on very important issues. Some people call it transition to a new kind of working. So I'll just put that out there, and to the extent that we want to talk about it now or later, I'll leave it at that.
Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. I would like to echo Councilmember Robinson's condolences for Nellie Moxley's family. It was a shock to hear of her demise, and she was one of the most active, caring people and residents of the city. She embraced the issues in her neighborhood and put in many hours of hard work advocating for those issues. She seldom, if ever, took no for an answer. She wanted. She had a persistence that is to me admirable, and she was a personal friend, and we miss her. I wanted to remind everyone that the farmers market is opening in the Crossroads area this coming Wednesday at 3 o'clock is the grand opening. The market will be open every Wednesday from 3 until 7 p.m. For those of you who haven't been to this market, it's been, I think this is the third year now, and it's a growing market. This year they have several, each week there's going to be different entertainers there. They're expanding the market this year, so it will be from Aldi's on Holton Lane all the way back to the Easy Storage on Holton Lane, with more vendors, more entertainment, and also some prepared food vendors this year also. So I encourage people to attend the farmers market this year, starting this coming Wednesday from 3 until 7 p.m. And then Dan, I was, or Councilmember Robinson, I should say, I was, I've been excited to talk with you about the, your ideas that have come out of the ICLEI conference. And I know that we had talked some about where do we go from here and how do we move forward. I've been concerned for several years that the city of Tacoma Park has lost its leadership position as environmentally progressive leader in the country. That we did many things in the past that put us at the forefront of the environmental movement. But in recent years, we haven't really kept pace with other municipalities and other communities across the country. So I'm kind of excited about not only what you've got back from the ICLEI conference, but also your suggestion that the council sit back and rethink how we approach environmental issues here in the city and how we can put together a plan to be more environmentally sensitive, to not only here within the city buildings, but also to help the community to become an environmental leader again. My concern is that we have an advisory committee with the Committee on the Environment that we have tasked with providing advice to this council, and yet as we look at maybe forming another group to deal with these issues, I think we need to be careful because it would create a conflict. And so I think we should consider at this point suspending the Committee on the Environment. I know we've had some trouble with having that committee having a full roster of members. And so I would like to suggest that rather than put in the time and effort that we have to get that committee to be as well-functioning as we hope, that maybe we put the effort into developing a task force to really think about how do we organize our environmental efforts. And so, Mayor Williams, I'd like to ask that we put the discussion on the agenda as Councilmember Robinson has suggested, and at the same time that we think about suspending the Committee on the Environment until a future date.
I'll be happy to do that.
Thank you.
Councilmember Wright, did you have a comment?
First, just want to again mention the mosaic. I have gotten probably 10 comments from residents in the last week, and a relative who was visiting and was walking around the community just how wonderful the mosaic is in its appearance and playfulness and everything. So I want to again commend the city staff for working with community on working it out and putting it together. I also want to say a thank you because I know that the much controversial and talked about parking lot improvement to the property on Park Avenue is finally supposed to get underway this week, and I commend the city staff for sticking with that and continuing to work with the council on finding resolution to that and bidding the project out twice, and finally I think we're getting closer to what the community would like. One relatively small item. I wonder if we could work with the District of Columbia to get the storm drain at the end of Maple Avenue at the corner of Maple and Carroll. There's a storm drain right next to the vacant Echo Park site. That's clearly a DC storm drain, but it's clogged, so it creates, when it rains heavy, it creates a puddle there, which actually stretches all the way back up into Tacoma Park, Maryland. And then the other issue is the intersection of Carroll Park and Columbia. Someone was almost hit by a car there in the crosswalk the other day. It was last November. We talked about trying to figure out with the State Highway Authority ways we can improve that, looking at options of putting raised crosswalk or paddles or something to make that much more well marked. I'll note that it's a bus stop for kids getting picked up in the bus, I think, to go to Sligo Creek Elementary. So it also has that factor in terms of safety. There's kids gathered there, and it's a little bit of a blind curve, so cars go by there rapidly or approach rapidly and don't realize kind of what they're facing, even to the point where in the past, people have ended up in the front yard there of the residents on the corner. So would want to get an update on where we are and working with the State Highway to improve the pedestrian safety on that, and B, see if we could have the chief, I know they've looked at that in the past, the police have run some details there, but if we could have some stepped up details to try and resolve that, particularly through the end of the school year, I think would be good. I know we don't have that much longer, but.
One day.
Is it Monday?
There's one more day of school.
Oh, only one more day
It
of
ends at
school.
noon tomorrow.
We set up, I saw the same email you did, and we've set up a detail there. And we're going to look at it again, and I have the results from the previous detail also, but
Great.
we're looking at it again.
Okay, thank you. I fully support Councilmembers Seaman and Robbins' suggestion that we freeze the Committee on the Environment for now and figure out what we want to do relatively quickly to really push us forward. I think the whole council is a big proponent of making the city more environmentally conscious and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And then lastly, I know the mayor, you and I have talked about this, and I know it's your intention to put it on the agenda, but it's time for us to talk about the boundary study. I didn't see it on there yet, but I'm hoping maybe we could do it before the August recess.
Yes.
So maybe the July 6th date, and just to sort of give my fellow council members my thoughts on this, I think we should not choose an option, but try and suggest that the superintendent follow some principles, many of which will be principles that the school system themselves have cited as things that are important, like keeping neighborhoods together. So
yes, that will be on the agenda soon.
Great, thanks.
And I'd just like to add my condolences to the family and friends and neighbors of Nellie Moxley. I worked with her for 14 years, and I would agree with Councilmember Robinson's assessment. She was always engaged and always willing to share her opinion and work with many people in the neighborhood on areas of common concern. She was tireless. Are there any other comments? The next item is any additional agenda items or agenda scheduling update. And what I'd like to do, I think we have both of the people who are here to interview for the vacancy in the Ward 6 seat, and that's scheduled as an 8:30 work session item, but I know at least one of you has time constraints, and so what I'd like to do is move that interview item forward at this point and just do that so that you all can feel free to either stay or leave depending upon your scheduling constraints, and then we'll go back to the agenda and do the public comment period and the city manager's comments, because my understanding is that at least one of you has to leave by 8. So maybe if we can move to agenda item 7 at this point and have our work session item on the interview of the applicants to fill the unexpired term for Ward 6 council member. And we have both Barry Lee Howard and Donna Victoria here. And maybe if you both want to come up to the table, and then we can start with Donna Victoria, and then we'll talk to Barry Lee Howard. And so you both gave the city clerk a letter expressing your interest, and if you can just share a little bit of your background and your interest in serving, and also at least acknowledge your understanding of what we're looking for here, which is an interim appointment to get us through to the November elections. And our hope and desire is that you want to do this, but not run in November, so that we're not in the position of appointing somebody and then anointing a successor as an incumbent. So if you can speak to all of those things, the floor is yours.
Okay. Mind if I go first? Where to start? Let's see. I've lived in Ward 6 since 1994. And I want to start out, since I think we only come here with complaints, saying that I absolutely love where I live and want to fight for it. There is so much potential in Tacoma Park with the Tacoma-Langley sector plan, which is probably the biggest long-term thing going on. And sometimes I feel like not everybody sees it. They see New Hampshire Avenue as kind of this scary, not very pretty corridor, and I see nothing but the future of our city there. We do know from constant encouragement from Erwin Mack that most of the commercial tax revenue comes from that corridor, in fact, and it could just be more than it is now. So I'm very happy with where I live. I think it has a lot of potential, and I'd like to see more interaction. There's always been a struggle in Ward 6 to get people to interact with the city. We always seem to keep the city at arm's length, and we're always trying to get people involved, and I've worked on that for a long time. I was secretary-treasurer of the New Hampshire Garden Citizens Association for several years. Currently, my husband is the reluctant president. He tried to get a vote for somebody to take it. I neglected in my letter to mention that for the city of Tacoma Park, I volunteered, I guess it's almost a decade ago, in 2000, to do the redistricting plan, to work on the redistricting committee. So actually looked at census data for the city. I'm pretty familiar with who lives in Ward 6. and all of the different neighborhoods. As I said, I live in New Hampshire Gardens, which is one of the big citizens associations. One of the other neighborhoods is Hillward Manor, and I infrequently, but I do know Mike Moore and do keep in correspondence with him on Ward 6 issues, and have had less contact of late with the towers, which are now called Overlook. But you know, those three sections, and then there's the Hillwood Manor apartments, are most of Ward 6, and I have had contact and did sort of study those folks when we did the redistricting plan. In addition, I'm trying to get more involved with the school. Both of my kids are Rolling Terrace Spanish immersion kids, so I'm going to be the PTA treasurer this year, and trying to get involved in a variety of things, in addition to our environmental cleanups and the constant work to clean up the Long Branch and Sligo Creek Stream Valley, which we've worked on for some time. I'm here because I emphatically do not want to run for this job in November.
This is the only way out.
Well, I'm trying to get I work in politics, so I'm very busy in even-numbered years and virtually unemployed now. So for me, I'm sort of overcompensating by volunteering to be PTA treasurer and volunteering to do this because I know that it's a big commitment of time to be on the council, and I don't usually have that time in an off year. But right now, I feel that I do. I've been following, to me, the big issues for Ward 6 are the Tacoma Langley sector plan, the school boundary change, which Mr. Wright referred to, which we're following because most of the children in Ward 6 are going to be affected by this. So we've been following that very closely, and the timeline for that is pretty much until November. The traffic calming is more or less done, and as far as other issues, it's really just sort of keeping things on track so that when someone gets elected in November, we can pass along the information and keep them fully informed. We have occasional crime problems, but I haven't seen it really getting worse, and most of it is sort of the garbage overflow. We have, cleanup problems, but again, it's trying to get people more involved in our neighborhood, which is difficult. And as I said, I actually rent an office here downtown. I had been downtown for a long time, and then I moved to Silver Spring, and now I'm back. So I just have the availability to talk to people and meet with people both during the day and in the evening, and I thought this was a way I could help out.
Thanks very much.
Any questions?
Questions? Councilmember Clay.
So I'd like to know why you're not willing to run for the full year, because I'd really like to see somebody else on the council that has children in the Tacoma Park Public Schools.
Yeah, well, it's a real shame, but I don't think there's an accident that people with younger kids find this a really big commitment of time. And for me, I run my own business, and next year I have to work on getting 3 legislatures to stay Democratic, and it doesn't work out for me. I would be doing short shrift to the council. I just don't think I would be showing up for meetings.
Right. Well, thank you for volunteering.
I'm along with Colleen, I'm the other New Hampshire Avenue representative. So I'm open, my ears are wide open on ways to take the sector plan all the way down New Hampshire Avenue to the district border. And so I'm curious about how you see, how you would frame the challenges, given that it's part Montgomery, part Tacoma Park, part Prince George's, with a district right there. Do you have any thoughts on that, in that you're in the political world, and how can you, if you were sitting up here, how would you go about prepping us and our own committee or Department of Housing and Community Development? How would you kind of push it along? There's 4 jurisdictions coming together in a relatively small circle, and that is a huge part of the problem. It's been part of the issue with immigrant issues that we have, that it's not just one jurisdiction, that you're dealing with 4.
and I don't have a miracle solution to it, but I do think that, we want some diversity of the businesses that are there. We want to encourage some. I've seen the sort of design plan, which talks about having local lanes or, a variety of things that are both traffic calming and encouraging more walking. I mean, one of the things in the early think outside the box sessions they had for Tacoma Langley is we suggested that, that intersection, that huge ugly intersection, is an inverted Zocalo. And you have all these people from South American countries where you come into the center of town and it's the opposite. There's an area where people rule. And it's the place where you go on set and everybody socializes and none of the cars are there. And instead we have all the cars in the middle and people are dodging the traffic on each side. And one of the plans sort of, it's a little late to try and put those roads around the Zocalo, but there's an awful lot of paved area, largely in Prince George's, that is unused. And they've talked about making sort of an offset block where people can walk and shop more. I think it's a gradual thing. I think that if we work on the Purple Line and the Transit Center, it's the busiest bus connection in Montgomery County, I believe. And I think approaching it from solving the transportation aspect of it will bring other things, as you're seeing as they've redeveloped in the city around metros and things like that. I think that is the part, but it's a long, slow haul. And you have to take into account current business owners' needs. And you do have, completely different jurisdictions on either side of the highway, so it's a problem. But we love the traffic camera.
At the bottom, I'll just add at the bottom, almost to the district, there's a Caribbean market. And they sell York Castle ice cream, which in my opinion is the best ice cream on the planet. And nice patties and other things too, Caribbean things. And they were putting speakers outside and cranking them up in the evenings to attract customers and have a party atmosphere. And they're in Prince George's County, and folks in my ward complained about it, and so we had a conversation. But I could see that they were trying to create a party atmosphere, or not quite a Zocalo, but some kind of people-oriented, visiting. And so there was a part of me that was reluctant to tell them just you got to cut the music down.
Yeah.
But it was too loud. It was coming right over and inappropriate. So. But,
yeah, it's a very tough balancing act.
It's a tough balance
to make everyone happy. It definitely is.
And I feel like I need to get you involved in this conversation. I don't want to leave you on the sidelines. And so thank you for your interest and the conversation. And if you can, I don't know how flexible your time is, but if you can stay a few more minutes, and then we'll maybe have a chance to kind of come back and make sure that both of you have covered everything that you want to cover as we talk with you. So, Mr. Howard, if you want to tell us of your interest and your experience and what you'd like to do.
I fully understand the scope of what's at hand here. So I understand that I wouldn't be running in November, and that's fine. I'm a sort of newcomer to the neighborhood. I certainly do not have the experience that my colleague has. She's been quite the civic organizer in the neighborhood, not only before my time, but also in the short time that I've been there for the last 2 years. Her and her husband, Chris, are quite a force in the neighborhood, and we're glad that they have taken such a commitment to try and to improve the neighborhood and improve the safety of the roadways for our children, for ourselves, so I appreciate their efforts. And actually, so they're an inspiration to me, and that's why I became involved. So I moved in the neighborhood in September of 2007, and I was a newcomer. I had lived in an apartment on the other side of Tacoma Park, closer to Silver Spring, Georgia Avenue. And I felt sort of cloistered away from, like what was happening within the city. I was in Montgomery Gardens apartment complex. You might know where that is. But anyway, now, so there's so much activity going on in Ward 6 right now. I was sort of like inspired to jump into the fray, because since I've been there the last 2 years, there's the schools zoning study as of late, which I was at the last meeting at the community center on New Hampshire Avenue, and Donna had a great deal of feedback on that, and I learned a great deal. My children are not old enough to be of that age yet, so that history of the annexation it's good background for me, but it's not, it won't affect me directly like it will Donna and other people in our neighborhood, as far as if their children are currently attending Sligo Creek Elementary and they might have to transfer. So I think that points to one of the things that I bring to the table is sort of a more objective perspective, because I don't have that history of the annexation and where the neighborhood has been. It's really more about vision of where the neighborhood can go, and the Tacoma-Langley sector plan, and the New Hampshire corridor plan, and the school study that's undergoing, traffic calming. I've been working on additional neighborhoods, Pinecrest, Sligo, Long Branch, have also been going through traffic calming studies and trying to learn from them. And then at a very sort of grassroots level, we've had a few foreclosures up on my street, and Donna's very aware of this. A couple of neighbors and I have just in the last few weeks gone to picking up trash in those yards, or I got out my weed whacker last weekend. It went and cut down. And I also called, the newsletter said, call this number, talk to the county, tell them that there's overgrown grass and whatnot. But I feel like it's this synergy of working together at this grassroots level with the county, with the city, trying to achieve safe neighborhoods and neighborhood improvements to where it'll attract new people to come into the neighborhood or people to stay that are there, improve the quality of life. The traffic calming study things that we've been involved in is looking at Donna Street. They have some speed humps right now, and they're very kid-centric on their street, and I think it's a good model for the rest of the neighborhood. So we've gone on, in the plans that we've worked as a community, as a neighborhood, is more traffic calming solutions and building consensus around that and how it can improve safety, laying down additional sidewalks so that our children can learn to ride their bikes on those streets, and that people can walk their dogs without fear of getting through traffic, running them off the road, and some of the dangers that were expressed earlier in one of the other neighborhoods. But back to the point about what I would bring to the table is sort of a fresh perspective. I have a great deal of experience in project management, so I would sort of take a PM approach to this. It's like, okay, we've got July 1 or the end of June effectively through the middle of November. There's a couple of hot topics, get focused on that and fulfill the needs, the current needs, reach out across cultural divides, which is something that I have a great deal of experience with, working with libraries and in an international organization. And I think that sort of like that experience that I bring from my professional life maps well to my civic life in the community, trying to reach across those cultural divides, and trying to build consensus, build community, and work towards shared objectives. But as I said, I bring the inspiration and energy and a certain degree of enthusiasm to the position but I don't have the experience that my colleague has to rest on. But there it is, and regardless what the outcome of this may be, I will still stay involved in the community. I have a family of my own and certain time constraints. My organization, I work for a nonprofit, we're going through some changes right now, and I have some professional changes on the horizon that might lend more time for me to focus on this short-term project to fulfill various shoes through the November elections.
Okay, thanks. Questions? Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. I have two questions. First, the residents of Ward 6 have a very wide range of income levels, and I just wondered why you feel that you would be able to represent that great diversity.
Well, interestingly enough, I live at near the corner of Wildwood and Jackson, and there's a great deal of white vans. And actually, I was a carpenter way back when in a former life, so now I'm a white-collar worker, but I used to be a blue-collar worker, and I feel like, and so my neighbor right next to me has been doing a significant amount of renovations. I think I have a certain solidarity with my neighbor, and I think that I can relate to so that position. And but it's not only those, but my backyard neighbor is a social worker, and she shares with me some of her experiences in working with abused women. And it's not just the white collar workers, the blue collar workers, but it's also the unemployed, the disenfranchised. I think that I would be able to reach across some of those barriers to try to identify with people, empathize, and try to reach some sort of commonality of understanding.
Okay.
My son.
No, I was just going to thank you, and I know you mentioned this is a short-term project, and you recognize that the council has asked people to volunteer who would state that they do not plan to run in November for the election to the seat for the following term. But I'm wondering why you're not just holding off and running in November.
Well, it's that inexperience piece. It's not that I don't think that I have something to offer to the council to fulfill its needs and to the city and to the community, but it's that the way I envision it is if I had this experience of this short term, that I could leverage that later on. So it wouldn't be that it would be a building block. So
Okay.
it's stepping up the current civic engagement that I have right now, not quite on the level of the Victorias, but getting more involved in the milieu, and then later on down the road being able to use that experience to serve the community.
Sure, that makes sense. Thank you.
Councilmember Wright and Councilmember Platt.
I just have one question. Are either of you Spanish speakers?
No.
Thanks.
Although I have to point out that this comes up all the time about Ward 6, and Ward 6 is way more diverse than simply Anglo and Latino. It has, again, because of the boundary issues, I went back and checked. The number of Latinos in our neighborhood is smaller than the number probably of, because of there's a very large number of African immigrants and Caribbean immigrants in the Overlook. I struggle with this all the time with people in Tacoma. And it's not a good thing, but there are far fewer Latinos living in Ward 6 than you think. We have translated the newsletter. Every time we get out a neighborhood newsletter, we translate it, but we do have language struggles. In addition to a hugely diverse Asian, African American, African immigrant, Caribbean immigrant, Latino, El Salvadoran immigrant, we are the melting pot, and we're happy that way.
I might add that both the Victorias and my family have gravitated towards that multicultural sort of project, if you will. I mean, her children, she mentioned, were in Spanish immersion. My toddler is at Centralia on University. That's in Prince George's, but it's within walking distance. They don't call it a Spanish immersion, but it's primarily Spanish speaking. They call it a multicultural program, and this is something that we've embraced because this is the world that we live in. And
We're
so
trying to correct our shortcomings in the next generation.
we're not running from it.
Councilmember Clay.
So I'd like to thank you for submitting an application, and I appreciate it that we have two folks who are interested in applying. I wanted to say in particular to you, sir, that I ran for office after I had only lived in Tacoma Park for 2 years, I think 2 years and 3 months, and I was the president of my neighborhood association the year before I ran, and I hear that maybe there's a reluctant president right now. But so I just wanted to to put that out there to you. And so I think there are other people who run for office who haven't lived in the city for 10 or 15 or 20 or in some cases, I don't know, 40 years. Anyway, do you have kids in the public schools? Your oldest kid is a toddler.
Right, he's 3.5, and then I have a 9-month-old. So we're
You get little.
sort of late starters, but my wife and I. But so they're not. That's what I was trying to address earlier. Is our children when we researched moving into the community, we looked at the various schools and we looked at the various neighborhoods and also budget. And so when we saw that our children would be slated to go to Sligo Creek, we were fine with that. My wife has an undergraduate in French, so she was fine with the French immersion, but the academy program too, that was fine. We looked at demographics, we're like, that's a good school. At that point in time, we weren't aware of the zoning. If it was on the drawing room table at that point in time, we weren't aware of it. Now that it's come up, it seems to make sense to us to fit the Down County Consortium's criteria for having children go to contiguous schools, having the zones contiguous with where the schools are located. That seems to make sense to us. And Tacoma Park Elementary and Piney Branch also are fine schools too. So it's not a showstopper for us. But we don't have children that are currently in the system that will be affected by it. So I'm sensitive to those, and I learned a great deal at the sort of town hall meeting that was held about a month and a half ago. And Donna sent out a message and gave her perspective because she does have that history and filled out. Like I took minutes from the meeting and shared that, but Donna fleshed that out. So there was a thread that was on our neighborhood listserv that was going on for a while. And people were very grateful that was happening, especially the ones that couldn't have made it to the meeting there.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. I'd just like to second what Colleen is saying. When I first moved here, I felt like people shut me down because I hadn't lived here as long. And the fact that I've been here 15 years is irrelevant. I'd love to see new neighbors get more involved everywhere. So it's not a credential.
Well, you're the inspiration to it. So.
Any other questions? Thank you both very much for volunteering and coming this evening. And our intention is to name somebody next week.
Okay.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
So have an enjoyable week.
Yeah, one of you may be your last.
And thank you to all those who are here for agenda items that we're going back to now, but felt like we had to take care of that important piece of business when those folks could be here. So I apologize for pushing back other items to get that in front, but we'll now go back to our regular agenda order, and we're at a public comment period for anybody who'd like to comment on anything that's not on our voting agenda this evening. And if you can please identify yourself and keep your comments to 3 minutes.
Hello. My name's Chuck Thomas, and I'm here to give another weekly report into what's been happening with the school boundary matter, and comment also on a couple of things that was said. The deadline for extending the process has passed, and I got an email this morning from Dr. Wiest, Superintendent Wiest's assistant, saying that he declined to extend the deadline to September 10th and allow each affected neighborhood to have a representative. Fortunately, my lawyer told me that the superintendent actually has the authority to reopen the process, which you could read all about tomorrow morning at reopentheprocess.org. In my efforts to reopen the process in the past week, we've got the endorsement of Casa de Maryland, also the Crossroads Center for serving Latino American youth, and the African American Parents Community Education Consortium of Montgomery County. The reason being because, as I mentioned, in addition to what's been happening in my neighborhood, this neighborhood east of New Hampshire Avenue, right here, designated very distinctly by the school system from west of New Hampshire Avenue, part of Ward 6. The east of New Hampshire Avenue part did not have a representative who lives there serving on the Boundary Advisory Committee. Further, the joint meeting that they held between SC4 and SC5, I still haven't been able to get. We only have aggregated sort of generalized terms of, oh, people overwhelmingly want to come to Tacoma Park Elementary, but nothing specific and nothing breaking it down SC4, SC5. So I went to the often overlooked myself, spent a couple hours standing in the lobby talking to people and collecting signatures on a petition that reads, our neighborhood needs a representative on the school's community advisory committee, and the June 10th deadline must be extended to September 10th to provide enough time to learn what the schools, the families, and all affected neighborhoods want. That said, all 30 people that I asked to sign, who understood understood English, all 30 of them signed it, including 11 affected families. And I wanted to address people with kids under 5 are very affected by this because the kids already in school will be grandfathered in. It's the kids not yet in school that are going to be sent to a different school than where their families were expecting. I also went to the houses in the little neighborhood south of the Overlook. Again, everyone I asked signed except for an elderly woman who said she didn't feel comfortable since she doesn't have a stake in the matter, not having young kids. And another woman who felt that her needs were represented by the folks from SC4. But otherwise, all 11 signed it, including 3 affected families. So to quickly wrap up, we now have at least 14 affected families. The Crossroads Center for Latino American Youth went out. They sent 4 volunteers out to Langley Park and collected 40 signatures. My eyeballing of it shows that most of them don't actually live in Tacoma Park, so I'm going to have to verify how many. But I'm sure that right now we have more than 15 affected families signed on. My estimate is that there are 30 to 40 affected families east of New Hampshire Avenue. So we do have probably close to half by now. So anyway, of those that signed, I got to ask 6 in the Overlook which school they would prefer, and all 6 said Sligo Creek, staying in Sligo Creek. I also spoke to a young man there who went through Sligo Creek in Silver Spring Elementary, and he was upset about getting, that they didn't have a representative, and he said, I don't think that's good. I liked Sligo Creek and Silver Spring Middle. I also spoke to 3 people in the houses and got the chance to ask them their opinion, and one of them was ambivalent, as I guess the guy here, could go one way or the other. Another one preferred Sligo Creek, and what did the other one? Well, I'll have more better. I don't want to take up too much more time. I appreciate you letting me go over. I'm going back to the Overlook with Tababu sometime this week, and I think we're going to reach every affected family, so I'll be able to tell you what all of them want next week, and then hopefully get a meeting together and someone, because I can't be a spokesperson for them, I'm just trying to help get them heard and together, and as the spokesperson emerges from the Overlook neighborhood, hopefully we can get them a seat, get my neighborhood a seat, and get the 2 neighborhoods in East Silver Spring that didn't have a seat, get those neighborhoods a seat too, and get everyone together for a win-win solution. So I thank you all.
Thanks.
Oh, and I encourage the Ward 6 person to spend some time hanging out in the lobby of the Overlook too.
Hello, my name's Pat Loveless, 7620 Maple Avenue. Well, I want to tell you, your favorite peace delegate wants to make a point to tell you that I turned on Channel 13 last night when I was at home suffering with a backache, and boy, did I have something to cheer me up. The Young Activist Club was taking on the issue of styrofoam in our schools, in our communities. It made me feel so great to see the children speaking up again, like what's more our adults should be doing. Because the city is for all of us. And it made me feel so good to see them coming up and speaking out. I want to thank all of them for coming out and speaking out, even though I was not here. I felt like the spirit of all of us was there. And also, I want to tell people that, you guys are getting out of school pretty soon. You've got to start with the ones you are over 18 now. and approaching 18 who've got to start learning how to register to vote. Because, you know, in November, we have elections coming up for our city council and stuff, and those elections are very important. You know, we have to take responsibility for our city and our community. We just can't sit here and be lumps on logs. You know, just because we got Obama in, just because we had such a great turnout last year, doesn't mean we can all sit down on our asses and do nothing. Because we still have to do something. We still got a war going on. We still got poverty going on. We still got drugs going on. We still got gangs going on. We got to do what we can to put an end to all that type of violence. We don't need a war in our hood either. So we got to do what we can. So come on out and vote for our city council in November. And I want to tell the kids in school to do what you can to be active. Come to our demonstrations. Come on down at the end of June, the 29th, 30th, and the 1st and 2nd of July to come on out for the Starving for Justice campaign against the death penalty. Because that's another form of warfare, another form of untold violence, which does no good. We cannot keep killing our inmates. For no matter what they did, we have no right to take their life. Only God has that right. And we got to stand up for what's just. Two wrongs don't make a right. And also, come on out on the 4th of July parade. We'll be out there in that pedicab again, that pink three-wheel bicycle you saw out there. Look for the big peace sign. And remember what that peace sign stands for. It does not stand for drug abuse. It does not stand for violence or guns. It does not stand for gangs. It stands for what is right, what is just. We got to remember that at all times. What we can do to make our community better. And also, I want to give my condolences to Nellie Moxley's family and all her friends and stuff, because I remember her. I remember riding to several of the different meetings with her in the back seat of the car, and boy, was she something. She was wonderful. And again, I want to thank the City Council for letting me speak. And also, I want to ask everybody who's listening tonight, please, get out there and be active. Get registered to vote. Come out and demonstrate when we need you. Don't just sit down and do nothing. Tacoma Park has a great leadership and a great heritage. Let's carry it on. Don't give it up. Don't give it up. Thank you very much for letting me share.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who'd like to make any public comments? Seeing none, does the city manager have any comments?
Sure. Just two quick items this evening. I wanted to let the council know that we have issued the request for bids for the auditorium renovation. Bids are due on July 7th, and we will bring in a request to award a contract to the council prior to your August recess, most likely either on July 20th, possibly July 27th. The only other item I had, this was actually a community advisory that was issued by the police department on June 8th regarding funds that the city is seeking from the U.S. Department of Justice. This is the Byrne Memorial Justice Assistant Grant. One of the requirements of this grant program is that we provide an opportunity for public comment in terms of what the funds would be used for. We are pursuing funds in the amount of $13,882, and the police department would like to use those monies, if awarded, for the purchase of a digital video and photograph records management system. This would basically allow the department to better store and retrieve digital photographs and to share those across departmental units. If anyone in the public would like to weigh in on this proposed use of funds, they can basically submit their comments to Captain Edward Corsi with the police department.
Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you. I just was curious on the proposals for renovation of the auditorium. If you have any feel at this point that we could, for a completion date, that we could be talking to the community about?
What I would do, Councilmember Siemens, I did get a more detailed schedule from the architect. I neglected to bring that with me this evening. I will take a look at that and report back next week if that would be all right.
I know there are many groups in Tacoma Park that are very interested in using the facility when it opens, and they'd like to start making plans as soon as possible.
Sure, I'll bring that date back next week.
Thank you.
Any other questions? And if I can just bring up one thing that I meant to bring up at council comments that I forgot. as part of my office hours tomorrow, I have a meeting with the auditors, and the thought there was that they have to make a presentation about kind of the beginning of the audit process, and in other years, they've come to the council and done that. We thought maybe if they fulfilled their responsibilities and did that, that would free up some council meeting time for pretty much a pro forma visit. But any council member who has any questions or wants to talk to the auditor may do so, and we'll provide the contact information, I guess, once we meet tomorrow.
Right.
And if there's anything to report back from that meeting, I'll do so. I don't mean to cut anybody out, and if anybody feels like they want to come to that pro forma meeting, they're certainly welcome. It's at 2 o'clock tomorrow upstairs. So not wanting to cut anybody out, but just wanting to take away what's a pretty pro forma piece of the process.
As the council may recall, as the mayor was indicating, there is a kind of a risk assessment and disclosure that the auditors are required to make. In addition to their meeting with the mayor tomorrow, they will be basically providing the same information that they discuss with him in writing. But one of the requirements is that they actually discuss it with an elected official. So what I would encourage the mayor to do is after you receive that letter, we can copy it and give it to the full council. And just as we did last year, I will provide the full council with the contact information for the partner from Clifton Gunderson, and any of you can feel free to contact them at any time about any concerns you'd like them to explore or investigate during the audit process.
Okay. Yes, Councilmember Robinson.
This was the risk assessment kind of piece that they said was kind of the revolutionary part of the transition toward a new kind of audit. Is that true?
Yes. I think what you're referring to is certainly, I think, in the wake of, unfortunately, the Enron scandal and other similar type of issues. The whole scope of auditing has changed considerably over the last few years, and so this is part of the kind of the new processes. They will actually every year basically go through the same, let's say spiel, I'm trying to find a better word, but basically disclosure to the governing body for whom they actually are working.
Okay, thank you.
So we'll all get the same information, you just don't all have to sit through it.
Thank God.
Okay, we'll move along to agenda item 1, which is a presentation on the request of the Housing Opportunities Commission to purchase 7411 Aspen Court. And
Mr. Andrew Zaleski from the Housing Opportunities Commission is here this evening to address the council.
great, and thank you for being patient.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. Once again, my name is Andrew Zaleski. I'm with the Housing Opportunities Commission of Cook County, and I am here today to request permission to purchase 7411 Aspen Court. Yes, we currently own two other properties on that cul-de-sac. One, the 742327 Aspen Court, and which we purchased in October of 2007, and then the oddly addressed 717 Cycle Creek Parkway, which is also on that same cul-de-sac, in December of 2008. This is the third building on that cul-de-sac, and we have the support of the Department of Housing and Community Affairs of Montgomery County for this acquisition, who will be funding it, as well as the renovation of it and the other two properties that we own. Just if you have any questions at this time, I'll be happy to answer them.
And my understanding is that the source and format of the financing isn't set, and depending on which one of those options you use, that'll determine some of the particular parameters about the affordability of the units in the mix.
The county, the Department of Housing and Community Affairs is committed to fully funding the acquisition and any rehabilitation. They have requested of us to pursue other sources of funding, whether it be through the state of Maryland, would be tax credits or partnership housing, or should any other types of funds become available to pursue that, just to supplement what the county has committed.
Okay, and so therefore, a part of the mix will be that there will be a couple of market rate units?
Yes, well, that's the county's desire, is to have potentially a third of the units be market rate, which would be between 2 and 4, depending on which building we're talking about.
So it's envisioned to be mixed income buildings?
Yes, there'll be market rate for a third, and then depending on which financing, I think the county requires 60% of AMI as income for the families who live there. Whether it's partnership or tax credits, it might be 40 or 50% of AMI, depending on which funding is actually which source of funding we actually are able to obtain.
Okay. Other questions? Councilmember Siemens.
This question is for the city manager. Will this require the council to take action to relieve HOC of rent control or rent stabilization?
Good question. I believe that as long as there are, you're a nonprofit, correct? I believe that there are certain provisions, Councilmember Siemens, in the rent stabilization law that would make them exempt, because there would be essentially a separate agreement in terms of the provision of affordable housing units, but I will confirm that with Ms. Dames.
Yeah, because I know when Montgomery Housing Partnership
Yes.
purchases a building, we do have to relieve them of rent stabilization.
Right, I believe that's correct, but I will confirm that.
Thank you.
I mean, you probably know the codes better than I, but it's my understanding that I think it's the source of financing requires a certain level that's
Right.
different than yours. It's not necessarily us particularly, but it's the financing that gets put in place. If we owned it outright, without the Montgomery County funding, we would have to abide by your rules. And the tenants who are there now, we've kept them at the same rents, and we're increasing them at the that the increase is set by your housing department.
Thank you.
Other questions, comments? Councilmember Clay.
Thank you for coming. This is actually in my ward,
Oh, good.
and not far from my house. I think that the way that the rent stabilization works is that the places that are under a separate contract, the individual units for the low, moderate income rates are eligible for exemption, but I don't think that the market rate units are eligible for exemption under the law. 'Cause I don't think it's based on the property. I think it's based on the units themselves.
Yeah, like you say, we'll research that and report back. I apologize, I don't know the answer to your question.
And I'm supportive of your purchase of the property and conversion. Now, you're with the Hawk, who also bought the 16-unit building with the 3
Correct. The
separate
16-unit
buildings?
building predates me. That was purchased under the right of first refusal.
Yes.
And the 717.
And it was a pit, and the landlord was a big jerk to all the people who lived there, and it was a drug haven, and it was really not very nice. But yes, it was bad. But when you came, not you personally, but when the Hawk came and talked to us about purchasing that, one of the things that they talked about, and which I was pretty adamant about, is that you really wanted it to be a good mix of incomes. I have a background in housing and housing affordability. I'm totally supportive of all the affordable housing, even down to people at 30% of the income and all kinds of ranges of housing. But in that particular area, which has been such a challenge in the neighborhood, one of the things that they said was that they would have home ownership units that were there as well, and they might be MPDUs or other things, but there would be some ownership units kicked into the mix. And then when they came back the next time, there are no ownership units then in that whole circle, which is disappointing. I really wish that there were some ownership units that were kicked into the mix there, and that 3-building property was the place where they were going to do that, and I think that opportunity has passed. So,
well, I will convey that to my superiors at HOC and also to DHCA. The acquisition of the Bacon building predates my existence at HOC.
I understand.
And I know that they actually looked at workforce housing for that location and for also for sale for that location. And I think due to the economy at the time, it was extremely cost prohibitive. But I will ask that we readdress that.
Right. So I guess the reason why I was so interested in that is that I think we really need to, break some of the patterns of behavior that are occurring in that courtyard area. So in lieu of that, we'd hope that you would make a commitment to, do what needs to happen there to change that behavior. I mean, one of the first things I did with the council was take a trip with City Manager Matthews and our old engineer, Ali. I can't pronounce his last name.
He's still our engineer.
He's still our engineer? I just haven't seen him in 2 or 3 years. Oh, and then the Public Works Director, I forget his name.
Oh, Alfred Lott.
Yeah, Al Lott. So we were all up there, and they were talking about getting rid of. There's a street that runs like a T up behind it. Mm-hmm. So there's Aspen Avenue, and then there's this T, and then there's the courtyard. And when we were talking about getting rid of
Sherry and the street with the park.
It's Colby is the one that is the top of the T, and Cherry is the access to the T, and then Aspen is this other one here. And there's actually a right of way that runs between Colby and Aspen, and we have problems with people. Essentially, you have criminal activity taking place in the Aspen court area, and then people are running up to Colby, and the police have to go all the way back around and up around to get over them. And we talked about whether we would pay to install a brick wall. I mean, all kinds of things going on that are in part because of the history of what's gone on in that area, but also in part because of the geography of it. So it's just something to be aware of, and I'm happy you're there, and I'm happy you're making the purchases and that you're investing in the community, but it's a challenge to keep in mind, and I really do think a broad array of mixed uses is one way to address it. I think mixed-use communities are much healthier than any community that you have as a single strata of housing, whether it's all 30% or all 60% or even all 80%. It's just much better to have a broader strata. So that's the deal, and I also hope that we can work with them to make sure that they can do what they need to do to make the finances work, because I know that if you can't do, especially if they have some that are like 30 and 50%, and your numbers don't work without some market rate units, and I don't think that our rent stabilization law allows for that, but I'd love to be wrong about that.
In terms of the redevelopment, would you mind if I either asked Ms. Daines or Ms. Walker to either stay in touch with you or to get me your contact information directly, so I can describe what we're doing there?
Sure.
And if you need a wall or something to that effect, that we try to incorporate.
It was just I'm not asking you to install a brick wall. It was just one of the things that we talked about to keep people from being able to escape from one side to the other. My contact number is on the website, has my home phone number listed.
Fantastic.
And you can call me anytime.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? So we'll have this item next week, and we'll vote on a resolution of support for the acquisition.
Great. Thank you for your time.
Our next item is the first item in special session, which is a first reading ordinance making technical amendments to Tacoma Park Code Title III Ethics. City Manager, just want to make a few comments on this?
Sure, just very briefly. As the council may recall, in March of this year, you enacted an ordinance amending the ethics chapter of the city code by adding certain conflict of interest provisions that were applicable to council members. We are required by law to submit any amendments to the State Ethics Commission for their review and approval. Attached in your agenda packet is the letter we received back from the Ethics Commission commenting on the ordinance the council enacted in March. As you read through that, there were some very minor technical changes that the Ethics Commission wanted the council to make in the ordinance that you enacted earlier this year. And basically that's what we're bringing before you tonight. It basically, they're very, very minimal changes, and they are shown as underlined additions in the copy of the ordinance that's before the council this evening.
If I can just ask one question. It's not a deal breaker for me, but this first item where it says legislative action means an official action or non-action relating to yada, yada, yada. Well, doesn't that mean everything? What else is there? Well, yeah, what else? If an action or a non-action is included in the definition, well, then
It's pretty much everything you do.
everything. And so
Okay,
I
you
wonder
want-
why it's necessary, and I read their explanation, but I'm still left wondering,
That's why lawyers get a lot of money.
Well,
why
don't,
we have to add non-action?
Yeah,
Is non-action just meaning voting against something versus being silent?
There is a specific non-action thing, I thought.
Councilmember Clay.
yeah, I just read that to mean that you could not take an action because you have an interest in something, like you could not take an action on this school board piece because you have a personal interest in where your own kid went to school. So you weren't taking an action, you were intentionally staying out of it and not engaging your job. Or I mean, you could do the same thing on a contract or something because the existing contract in some way benefits you, and you take a non-action to remove an underperforming contractor because it's to your benefit for them to continue, and then you'd have a non-action.
yeah, I mean, I think if you...
That helps.
I thought that was all they meant.
I think that's very similar. I mean, the state's definition, as I'm reading this, includes the introduction of a bill, sponsorship, as Councilmember Clay was just alluding to, consideration, debate, amendment, passage, defeat, approval, or veto. So I do think it is talking about the council's formal role in terms of debating any type of legislation, whether you end up enacting it or not. But certainly,
As opposed to non-action, meaning you leave the room and therefore you could have an ethics violation.
yeah, I think non-action means you're not actually enacting legislation, but as I think one of the examples Councilmember Clay just alluded to was perhaps the introduction or sponsorship of a bill in and of itself. But obviously, Mr. Sigmund is our kind of guru of this, and Ms. Perlman is here tonight, so we can certainly relay this to him and see if he has any other sense of this.
Any possible, and it could just be a quick,
Email. Sure.
sentence, paragraph, whatever, just to, if it's confirming what has been stated here tonight, just so we know for sure, that would be helpful.
Sure.
And we'll have that before second reading.
Yeah, I think typically when you hear the term legislative action, it's construed as being narrowly defined as a vote by the city council in the formal enactment of legislation. Clearly, the intent of the state ethics law is broader than that, but I'll confirm that with Mr. Sigmund.
That would be helpful. Other questions, comments? It's been moved by Councilmember Snipper. Is there a second? Seconded by Councilmember Siemens. Any further discussion? Any public comment on this first reading ordinance? Seeing none?
I just think I have to abstain because I'm a little confused about action and non-action.
But that would be a non-action on your part.
And therefore, it's an ethics violation. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstains? Carries unanimously. The next item is a first reading ordinance authorizing FY09 budget amendment number 4. And I believe City Manager also will have a few comments on that.
Sure. The proposed budget amendment that's before the council this evening basically deals with the speed camera fund and the community center fund. As the council is aware, the speed camera program, we were a little uncertain when the budget was adopted last year as to when it would become operational. So the FY 2009 budget as it presently stands does not actually have a speed camera fund. So part of the budget amendment that's before the council would basically establish that fund and also provide for revenues and expenditures. Did want to note for the council's benefit that, as I noted in the blue cover sheet, the revenues that we are estimating are considerably less than what you saw during the FY 2010 budget process. What we are seeing, I guess, is that, one, there seems to be a bit of a issue with people actually all paying the tickets, at least on time. So we're seeing some time lag with actually paying the citations. And certainly as we're getting kind of up and running and trying to get the processing through the county, it's actually been a little bit slow getting the revenues. So we may actually hopefully get more timely payment and collections, but at this point we are estimating that we will receive about $300,000 this fiscal year. We have a check, I think, for about $70,000 that we've already gotten. which represents partial payment of the citations that were issued in April. The only expenditures that are included in this budget amendment would be the required contractual payment to the vendor, ACS Solutions. There will be some charges associated with getting checks for this specific fund and some other bank charges. We are in the process, it's authorized by the council in the FY 2010 budget to hire a civilian employee to help with the processing of tickets. But at this point, the chief has 2 existing staff people who are assigned to that, and they are having some difficulty keeping up, so we are requesting that there be $3,100 appropriated so that those 2 individuals can perform some overtime for the remainder of this fiscal year and actually stay on top of the tickets, because there are specific time frames that they have to review the citations within. So that's basically the proposed amendment related to the speed camera fund. As we just talked about a few moments ago, the auditorium project was obviously substantially delayed while we waited for some resolution at the state level about the use of program open space funds. As a result, construction will actually not begin until FY 2010. So the amendment that's before the council this evening would basically make the corresponding adjustment in the budgeted revenues and expenditures for the community center fund, just so we don't have such a huge variance, since we had actually hoped the project would be done this month, and that's not happening. The other thing related to the community center fund, I did want to make sure I call it to the council's attention. There are very specific processes that we have to go through the state in order to get reimbursement through either the state bond bill process or the program open space program. We do not expect that we will basically be reimbursed for at this point, which is our design fees with iStudio, prior to the end of the fiscal year, since by law all funds must be in balance as of the end of the fiscal year. This budget amendment would authorize an operating transfer up to the amount of $250,000 from the general fund to the community center fund. The majority of that would be repayable to the general fund once we receive reimbursement through the grant process. As the council is aware, there are certain expenses we are incurring related to Phase 1 and Phase 2 of the community center project. Phase 1, we did reach a settlement agreement with James F. Knott, so that's done this fiscal year. We are still in litigation with the contractor for Phase 2, and those expenses basically are not eligible for grant reimbursement. So the majority of the $250,000 would be repayable to the general fund, but I did want to make it clear that not all of it would be, because they are expenses that are not eligible for reimbursement.
Thank you. Somebody want to move the ordinance?
Move.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Clay, seconded by Councilmember Robinson. Discussion? Councilmember Clay.
So I have a question about the payment to the speed camera people. Have we ever gotten any kind of satisfactory response from them about the installation of the speed camera on Ethan Allen, wherein their contractor drove over one of our citizens' flower beds while making an illegal U-turn in the middle of Ethan Allen, and the haphazard way in which they installed the giant electric box and other stuff on.
I know that Sergeant Skibicki has been in contact with both the property owner as well as the contractor. I don't recall the resolution of that issue.
I couldn't catch all the question.
This is over on Ethan Allen. There was a, just to refresh your memory, Chief, there was a problem with the one location where there was someone ran over the curb. It was actually a subcontractor to ACS, I believe.
They went back, put grass down, put hay over it, and everything's been straightened out. Drove by there, it looks fine now.
Okay.
They went back within 2 days of you calling, and the person I think spoke to you, didn't they?
Yes.
Well, it wasn't 2 days the first time I called, but okay.
But it was taken care of.
Good. So what about the person who has like 3 giant fixtures in their front yard? I think that when they installed those, they didn't pay very much attention to sort of the juxtaposition of the devices to the the person's driveway, and just planted smack dab in front of the woman's house.
They're on the public right of way. They're not on our
I get it that they're in the public right of way, but that's not what I'm talking. I'm not talking about whether it meets the bare minimum legal criteria. I'm talking about how they could have executed it.
Well, I'm not sure where they could have put him in any other position, and I've been down there several times to look at them,
I know you
and
have.
I've spoken to her, and I think they're in the best position possible for that location. They can't move them, and she has barrier from her property with the bushes that she had there that were already there. You can see when you go out of the driveway, because we did look and we did test it, so I think we've done everything we can reasonably do in the situation. I mean, that's the spot, that's the public right-of-way form, and that's where they got to put it. That's part of the program.
I think that it's not the best way for us to interact with our citizens to put giant fixtures in the square center of their property on a 50-foot property line. I mean, I think that with a little more care, they probably could have planned a position that put things at, you know, as much as you could at the side of the property. I understand it's a public right-of-way, but
That's also the spot where the electrical box is, that's why they went there.
well, they installed the electric box.
No, the electric box is already there, that's where the conduit was. The box goes there, that's where the electrical outlet is. The box was already there. They put other conduits up because that box is there, that's where the electrical feed is for that spot.
What I would say, Councilmember Clay, in retrospect, and I did indicate this to the property owner several months ago, I think one of the things where we probably did err is at least in not personally contacting the property owner and letting her know what was going to happen in advance. I think part of, not saying she would be any happier.
No, I know.
But I did apologize to the property owner for that because I think we could have done a better job communicating with her on the front end of this.
Well, so if we put in any more speed cameras, I think we should come and revisit this issue about how we install them. And the other really interesting thing I learned talking to the speed camera guy who actually works for the company while I was out there is that they have these, they have the portable cans. Because, you know, you can't put the truck very easily on Ethan Allen. You park it on the sidewalk, everybody would see it, but you can't park it over the sidewalk. But they did have these portable cans, which I thought were also a much more interesting solution because it's less visible. It's spot enforcement. I think spot enforcement, I don't know, you would know better than I, spot enforcement can be more effective than, you know, a single repetitive site is. And
Well,
so I think that's something to think about in the future, too.
I mean, we learned a lot of lessons in installing the cameras, but one of the reasons we didn't go for that, there's personnel cost in that, and we were obviously trying to save money, so we didn't look at the mobile cameras, and we only had at the time, and still at this point, 2 places in the city that I thought, and based on discussions with them, that the cameras could go. I was also under the impression when the cameras installed that the company would make contact with the people, and we obviously learned a valuable lesson they did.
All right.
Councilmember Wright?
Yeah, I would just echo the process aspect of it, because this is something we skewer WSSC and Washington Gas around not talking to us or not talking to residents. And I understand if we thought they did, and we made a mistake there, but I'm glad we've learned a lesson. I just had a question about the timing of collecting the dues, or collecting the penalties. Is this something that other jurisdictions who have started have seen a similar delay? Is this kind of within the realm of what's been seen in the past, either as told by the vendor or by other jurisdictions? I know, Chief, you're frequently in contact with other
Yeah, my understanding, the Chief can correct me if I'm wrong, is I think there have been some delays. I think one of the things right now is obviously Montgomery County is providing this service free of charge, and quite candidly, if I were them, I would not have taken on this responsibility without charging the municipalities. I have to be honest about that because it is a considerable volume. I think they are in the process. We've been working under a temporary MOU. Just emailed today to find out if they have had some internal discussions, and I think what is being communicated to all the municipalities is that the county will likely impose some type of processing fee, very akin to what we do for their collection of real property taxes, where the municipalities are assessed a charge. Presumably, they will then use those monies to hire additional staff to work with this program, and the Chief and I have had a discussion that if I'm certainly paying for the service, and I think I have a right to expect a certain turnaround time, and I would envision that would be a part of the discussion and the MOU that we would enact with the county.
Thanks.
And did I understand you correctly that the reduction in the amount that we're talking about, assuming receiving in FY09, is less purely because of timing, or is it also that it's a revised estimate based on actual numbers?
We only have, I mean, obviously, the program's only been running now for just over 2 months. I think it's a little bit difficult for us to tell. I mean, I think, did a reasonably good job of trying to estimate how many citations we thought there would be per month. Based on the citations that were issued during the month of April, and obviously people get an opportunity, a second notice and things such as that to pay, but at least based on the citations that were issued in April and the payment we received, only about 20% of those citations have been paid, and basically that's the amount that the $70,000 was based on. So I think it's just something, Chief and I talked about this, that we're going to have to keep track of, try to get a better sense of, whether it's some timing issues. But I do think that, we are looking at some possibly not full compliance with paying citations. Chief, is it correct that if they are Maryland drivers, their tags can be flagged?
It's a process that starts. They get a notice, and then we go flag the vehicle.
Okay.
So if every citation that was issued in April had been paid, it sounds like we would have received
considerably more money.
$350,000 for citations in April?
That's about right, yes.
Wow.
We are seeing an incredible number of citations on New Hampshire Avenue. Unfortunately, our goal is obviously for people to stop speeding and to see that number go down. I believe, and Chief can correct me if I'm wrong, it's been a couple days since we talked about it. I think in the month of April, there were about 8,000 and some citations, I think, that were written just across the city, but obviously most of that was on New Hampshire Avenue. I think during the month of May, it was roughly about 5,500 citations that were issued.
So it has dropped.
It has dropped. So I think it's just one of the things that I think we're just going to have to look at, truthfully get a better handle on kind of the ebb and flow of both the number of citations and the payments. As I indicated in the agenda cover sheet, once we have a better sense of this, obviously we were preparing the FY 2010 budget before the program was even implemented, and it's very conceivable that we may come back to the council in the fall and suggest an amendment to the FY 2010 budget once we have a better sense of what's happening.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions? Any public comment on this ordinance, budget ordinance? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Passes unanimously. Next item is a resolution authorizing the city to accept a conveyance of the condemned public nuisance property located at 36 Philadelphia Avenue. And the city attorney is here. Are there some things that you want to tell us first?
This is a vacant, unsafe, deteriorated home. It's been condemned by Montgomery County since December 2004 and probably was in disrepair prior to that date. It is in the historic district. There's been code enforcement proceedings against the owner, Mr. John Garrison, for he was supposed to repair or demolish the property within 30 days of about 2 years ago. He has not done so. He's been found in contempt of court for failure to repair or demolish this property. He had previously represented to the court and to the county attorney that he was willing to donate the property to some government or charitable organization. The judge basically has more or less taken him up on this and indicated that he should do so. And Montgomery County isn't interested in the property, and we've explored it with at least with one historic preservation group who also isn't interested in taking it. And so this would be a determination whether or not the city is willing to accept the property if Mr. Garrison is willing to deed it over to the city. There are some issues, of course, the repair of the property, so the city would be taking on at least the maintenance responsibilities, plus there's a cloud on the title, a lien that may have been fraudulently put on the property. We don't know all the facts. I do believe that the city would need to go through legal action, a complaint to quiet title, I think there's a very high likelihood the city would prevail on this and could be able to clear the title and make it marketable. If Mr. Garrison retains ownership of it, it just doesn't seem that it will ever be repaired or demolished, since he hasn't done so in the past during his term of ownership, really since 1966. If he is willing to deed the property to the city, as I said, the city would take action to clear the title and to stabilize the property as needed, and then the idea would be the city would do some sort of bid process to seek someone who was willing to take on either repair or demolition and rebuilding something of the property. Let any bidders tell us what they're willing to do to the property. This is not an idea that the city would maintain long-term ownership of this property.
Okay. So just to reiterate, this is a resolution authorizing acceptance of the property if it were offered.
Yes, Mr. Garrison has said he was not going to do this. This is how he would purge or remove the contempt of court.
Would somebody like to
Move it. Second? Whichever that was.
I think I'll say Councilmember Wright moved it, Councilmember Siemens seconded. Councilmember Siemens?
Thank you. Just two questions. One is, will a conveyance be contingent on clearing the encumbrance?
No, we will take a quitclaim deed, whatever title Mr. Garrison can give us.
Okay, and so as I understand it then, if in fact we're not able to clear the lien, then we will be responsible for it?
For the lien or for the property? We won't be responsible for the lien, no. At worst,
It does not run with the property?
it runs with the property, but it would not be essentially a personal liability of the city of Tacoma Park. At worst, the lender could foreclose on the property.
Okay.
Beyond the value of the property, you're not at risk.
I understand. Thank you.
Councilmember Wright.
I think this is an unfortunate situation, but the city has tried in over a period of time to try and get this rectified along with the county. I know you spent many hours in court, and I appreciate that around this issue. And I, see this a little bit as an option of last resort, but something that the city needs to do. And if the property owner listens to the court and gives the property over to the city, it gives us control of it, and we can clean the property's title, hopefully, and we'll have the power to be a rational owner and get the property back into working order, either by selling it to someone who will repair it at the current property, or selling it to someone who demolished that property and build something that's appropriate to the surrounding community.
Councilmember Robinson.
And I'm assuming that City Manager Matthews, that our Department of Housing and Community Development is willing to take it as well.
We will do whatever the council would like us to do.
That we have the capacity, I guess I should say that we have the capacity to take this and work with it.
I think it's like anything else. This was obviously not on the staff's work plan, but it certainly has been an issue staff has been working very closely with the city attorney's office on. Obviously, if Mr. Garrison is willing to sign over the property, one of the first things we'll do is, make sure that we can make whatever repairs are necessary to at least stabilize the property so that no further damage occurs.
I think this is seen as sort of the only chance to remove the nuisance.
The only chance to remove the nuisance, right? And except unless we let it just deteriorate over time. If we're required to stabilize it, that stabilization, we would incur the cost of that stabilization. Am I right?
That's correct, because it would be essentially we would have accepted the property, and so that would be our responsibility. Yes.
So we'd have that discussion about how much it would cost and so forth.
Right. There are clearly different degrees of what may need to be done. I think if this were to go through and Mr. Garrison, elects to sign over the property to the city at tomorrow's court date, then we'll immediately kind of start that evaluation process and determine what options there might be and bring those back before the council with associated cost.
Okay.
Councilmember Slipper.
A question. Do you know offhand, either the city manager or Ms. Perlman, how many other properties the city has acquired in similar circumstances?
To my knowledge, none.
Yeah, that was what I thought too, that we've never done this before.
It's
I've never heard of the city. I think this is a very unique case in terms of the circumstances, and certainly Ms. Perlman may be able to answer this better than I, but I'm not familiar with any circumstance where there's been a contempt that has been proposed to be purged by the owner signing over their property to a governmental entity.
This is a very unusual circumstance, in other words.
Yes. We've purchased properties
Yes.
before to remove nuisances, but never quite in this framework.
I just want to reassure the public essentially that the city is not proposing a new policy of, condemning and acquiring properties by this method.
Any other questions or comments? Councilor Morales.
And this is tomorrow. Something will happen tomorrow. It may be that it comes into our ownership tomorrow.
Well,
I'll let you know,
May or may not, right? We don't know.
assuming he shows up at the hearing.
Well, ordinarily, I'd say not in my backyard, but since it is in my backyard, I'll say yes.
1 o'clock if you wish to come.
Any other comments? Is there any public comment on this resolution? Seeing none, all those in favor of the resolution, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Carries unanimously. Next item is a single reading ordinance amending a previously awarded contract with ECC for Phase 1 and Phase 2 environmental assessment at Sligo Mill and Poplar Mill. Would somebody like to move the ordinance?
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Snipper, second by Councilmember Clay. And Public Works Director is here to tell us what we need to know.
Attached to your packet there, you've got a map which sort of shows the overall property as well as the current conditions around it. We put out a RFP and selected a vendor, and the council awarded a contract for the Phase 1 and Phase 2 environmental site assessment. The Phase 1 assessment has been completed. Based on the information gleaned from that process, the contractor recommends that we do some additional testing to what was outlined in the original request for proposals. Through the Phase 1, they identify that there are 2 known past contamination incidences at 2 different properties that are outside the boundary of that property. And so basically their recommendation for us is due diligence would guide us to want to make sure that the contamination from those sites didn't end up in the property that we're currently evaluating. So in addition to the test sites that they'd already identified, they're recommending that we do 4 fairly extensive soil borings. These are 50 feet deep, and the process would be that as they go down, they're taking soil and any water that they run into samples along the way, so they'd be able to do a sort of a graded assessment throughout the site. They also have a sniffer that they have available that notes hydrocarbons and other things and indicates if there's a presence of petrochemicals or other things like that. It's going to be important information for us to have. It's still unclear to me the ultimate end result of all this process, but it is something that we've agreed to do with Park and Planning in terms of developing a management plan. And in order to really develop an effective management plan, we need to know what it is that we're managing, other than the invasives that are obvious and present on that site. But there's been significant and documented dumping on that site, so we need just to identify both conditions around the site as well as if there's the potential for contamination to have occurred on the site itself. They've already completed the other tests that were recommended. And in fact, our bid called for 10. They expanded the number. I said in my cover sheet 20. There's actually 22 test pits that have been installed around the site. These are much less deep. They're not anywhere near 50 feet. They basically go to the point of rejection. So as soon as they hit grade or concrete or whatever, they stop, and they follow a similar process. They're looking for soil samples, but if they find groundwater in those samples, they're taking those tests as well. So we're going to get quite a bit of information at the end of this that the city can then use to develop the management plan with. Our original contract was just shy of $16,000, $15,800. The additional soil borings that they're recommending would add almost $10,000 to that contract, given that it's more than 25% of the original contract amount. We need to go back to you all to get authority to do those additional tests.
But the money is in the budget.
Yes, this is being funded through the stormwater budget. We had put funds aside, significant more funds than what originally was bid for. The thought a year or more ago when we first started planning this was the cost was going to be more significant than it turned out to be. I think we hit a very nice window in terms of availability of very well-skilled firms and a hunger for contracts, so we were able to capitalize on that, just a quirk in timing in the economy. We've been very happy with the results of the test. The firm that is doing this work has been very thorough, really doing a good job, so I think we'll have some good information at the end of this.
Good. Questions or comments? We'll just go right down this side. Councilmember Snipper. Siemens.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing this to us tonight, and I think it's very appropriate to be discussing this tonight, just short, less than a week after the demise of Nellie Moxley. I know she was very interested in the preservation of this property. She was very outspoken about her support of the city purchasing this property and working with the county to purchase this property several years ago. And she was also concerned about the fact this property had been used as a dump over many years. And so I know that she would be very pleased to see the work that you're doing here on this at this time. Do I understand your map correctly that the various proposed test pit locations are at this point ones that have been completed?
Yeah, the 22 that are shown there are the originally planned testing. What I don't have here, though I can pretty much tell you where the 4 soil borings would be done. There would be 2 on the property kind of adjacent to the Jolie Cleaners, and there would be 2 on the property adjacent to the Jiffy Lube. So they'd basically be trying to go with topography downgrade from those known sources of previous contamination incidences.
Okay. It looks like there's a dump site that follows the property line right behind the Red Line Motors. Is that a active dump site where there's current dumping going on?
There's been dumping there for as far back as I can remember. I guess you would call it fairly active. There's a lot of late night, trucks pull up, dump stuff there. We've dealt with that and cleaning up that from the Public Works Department point of view for years and years. I don't know the extent or the depth of that. I know there's a lot of surface dumping, which is currently what's taking place.
Do we have any reason to believe that business at that site is participating in that dumping?
I haven't gotten any information that indicates that they've linked anything back to a local business.
Okay, thank you.
Has there been any thought to putting up a webcam on the back of that business pointed at that area so we find out who is dumping?
We haven't taken a look at that, but that is certainly something that could be done. Once we start developing the management plan for the area, clearly curtailing the dumping is going to be an essential component of that. One of the ways to do that is right now the road kind of goes back there to a dead end. If we could take out the road or stop the road in a more visible place closer to the Sheridan Avenue intersection, we think we do a great deal towards eliminating what happens on that dead-end road down behind there.
Webcam might be a cheap, short-term solution.
Yeah, we could talk to the police department.
Powered from the back of their building?
Yeah, we could talk to the police department about how to move forward with that and what would be necessary in terms of enforcement, once you got the pictures of what you do with them.
Councilmember Clay.
Take an old police car and put a camera on it and park it down there. And then maybe you wouldn't even have to pursue them because they'd see the police car and they'd leave. Are there 21 townhouse lots on this?
Part of what you see there is what it was platted for from the owner that Park and Planning purchased this property from. So prior to the purchase of the property, there was a plan originally to do townhouses, and I think there was a storage facility proposed at some point. My history is a little foggy, but those, they had gotten as far as identifying lot lines.
The road and the cul-de-sac and all of those townhouse lots were the subject of much discussion at the city council.
Excellent. I'm just asking, I don't want to.
Yeah, all
So
there is,
these aren't lots that are owned by people or anything, and we're not just talking about it, okay.
the only thing that is currently not part of the site is that one individual lot near where it's listed as dump 2. That is a property. The city has information that indicates that property is in foreclosure, and the city attorney's office has been looking into the possibility of purchasing that property.
And it's like a house or something?
It's a house.
Okay.
Old house.
It's a house.
Last, wasn't Bruce, last one without plumbing?
Yeah, I think it was the last outhouse in the city.
Really?
Yes.
Maybe I'll buy it, just for nostalgia. Okay, so then, do any of these places, the restaurant, the Jiffy Lube, the office, the parking lot, the Red Line Motors, do any of them access those sites from this road back here?
I think the restaurant has a driveway in and out, into the back.
Okay, but they also have one.
Oh, and I believe Jiffy Lube does too.
So does the office.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Rory.
I'm just wondering if they happen to strike black gold, who gets to keep the oil?
Well, they're going deep enough.
Councilmember Robinson.
Councilmember Siemens, you took the words out of my mouth as regards Nellie Moxley. And I think we ought to consider calling this the Nellie Moxley Memorial Deep Boring Resolution or something. Because she was always trying to get underneath what the real story was. Oh, and what is the discarded UST at the top of the map?
Underground storage tanks.
Okay.
But it's a 550-gallon tank that was dumped there.
It was dumped there and it's not
Right, it
underground.
wasn't located on that property, it wasn't active, it was
Just dumped there.
pitched in from someone.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Snipper.
Right, thank you. A quick question, why is it called Sligo Mill Poplar Mill, since it's on Poplar Avenue?
Because it was two different properties, and those are the names of the two properties.
Thank you.
Okay. One other component, just for your information, as this develops, and we'll be updating you, we have been in touch with both community organizations that are adjacent to and near this property, and we have received volunteers who, from the neighborhood, who will be willing to meet with the city as a task force and help develop the management plan once we get the collected information. We're also doing, now I'm going to get the words wrong, but natural forest stand delineation, whatever it is, NFR, SDI. Anyway, there's a bid out right now for that. It'll be done before the end of this fiscal year. So that component will also be combined with this information to come up with an entire package. That basically tells us what species are growing on the site.
Okay. I think we've finished with questions or comments up here. Is there any public comment on this ordinance? Seeing none, it's a single reading ordinance. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Williams.
Aye.
Councilmember Clay.
Aye.
Councilmember Robinson.
Aye.
Councilmember Siemens.
Aye.
Councilmember Snipper.
Aye.
Councilmember Wright.
Aye.
Passes unanimously. The last item on our special session agenda is the single reading ordinance authorizing purchase of a roll-off trailer for public works. Would somebody like to move the ordinance?
Move.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Snipper, seconded by Councilmember Robinson. Something you want to tell us about this one? It's a roll-off trailer.
It's
It'll
roll-off trailer.
It'll save money in the long run. It'll cost a little bit up front and give flexibility.
Right, right. And it's had a long and circuitous history as to its evolution. The truck replacement has been in the capital budget for many, many years, and the truck finally died and hasn't been replaced. We've rolled and continued the funding as we try to decide what to purchase. Originally, we were looking at purchasing a roll-off truck, but they're a very expensive piece of equipment. And in talking to my staff and taking a look into it, we really thought that our needs could be met with a trailer that pulls behind one of our large international dump bodies that we currently have on site. The number of times that this needs to get used it would be one that if we had a truck, it would be sitting more than it would be operating. So we just saw this as a much more effective way to provide that service without the significant cost that a whole engine-bodied cab truck would result in.
Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you. If I look puzzled, it's because I'm trying to figure this out. A roll-off, you're talking about dumpsters?
Yes, a dumpster that is attached to a cable that rolls up onto the back of a dump body.
And do we own any dumpsters?
No, we currently don't own dumpsters.
So whose dumpsters are we rolling off?
Well, we could continue the arrangements we have with the dumpster companies that provide them to us now, or we could purchase them. The equipment maintenance shop has been in communication with a number of different sources for used dumpsters. So we feel we'll be able to acquire 2 or 3 dumpsters in a fairly reasonable price.
So what we do now is basically rent dumpsters from
We rent
other
dumpsters and
companies?
rent the hauling service.
And, okay.
Yeah, so we
Yeah.
pay both for the rental as well as the transportation. And the
dumping
disposal
fee.
at some time, yeah.
Yeah. And so the math works out that we do it often enough that this is a cheaper
yes.
solution?
Oh, yes. We're pulling our scrap metals dumpster probably 10 times a year, and we're pulling our street sweeping dumpster probably at least that much. There have been some years when we've had much more debris than others. As you know, we are the site of some dumping ourselves, so on occasion we have to haul away stuff that people have illegally left at our dead-end street. And so on those occasions, we'll have more.
Sounds like another location for a webcam.
Well, hopefully with the renovation, we'll correct that problem.
And so how much this is, the lowest bidder on this would be the $58,000?
$58,476. The bids were bidding identical pieces of equipment from the 2 different vendors.
Okay. When I, use a dumpster, it's costing me about $500, including dump fee. And you're talking about that we use dumpsters about 20 dumpster loads a year. So 20 times 500 still leaves us a little short of $58,000.
Well, there's additional costs that are incurred on that. The arrangements we have are both for rental as well as for transportation. We're currently paying fuel surcharges for a lot of that hauling. We're losing the revenue from our scrap metal right now, so we'll have some revenue recovery with that. So there's a number of different factors that add into that cost. That cost is a very conservative cost. We probably will exceed that amount of money.
But it's also, isn't it kind of amortized because the thing's going to last more than 1 year? Or do I have that wrong?
Yes, it should last. It probably will have a 12 to 15-year life.
Okay. And there will be some maintenance costs associated with that?
Yeah, because it doesn't have much moving equipment, as long as you keep a good PM schedule with, the appropriate maintenance, it should be fairly limited maintenance requirements.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions, comments? Any public comment on this ordinance? Seeing none, will clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Williams.
Aye.
Councilmember Clay.
Aye.
Councilmember Robinson.
Aye.
Councilmember Siemens.
Aye.
Councilmember Smith.
Aye.
Councilmember Wright.
Aye.
That passes unanimously. We have already taken care of our work session item number 7, so we'll take a short break and come back for our final item, which is a discussion of the Tacoma Line Crossroad. This was first contemplated. There was some discussion at that point about a joint sector plan and joint public hearings with the whole body sitting together, and it was going to be the county council's sitting as the district councils, it was going to be the county planning boards, and it was going to be, I think I remember, the mayor and the council member from Ward 6 from the city. I know we're now in separate track processes with separate hearings, and has any possible participation by the mayor or the Ward 6 council member gone away, or is that still contemplated to be a part of any process?
I wouldn't say that's gone away, but it's moved more into a sequential process as opposed to a concurrent process.
Okay.
So in July, the council will look at Montgomery. Currently, the council is looking at the Prince George's County part of the sector plan, which is the Langley Park area through to Rakes Road. And then in July, the city council will look at the Montgomery County portion of the sector plan, which is the part that's in Tacoma Park.
And so if there is a formal participation by the city, it will be in the Montgomery County sector plan?
The formal action would be a resolution which would then feed into the formal planning board hearing. And then if needed, the city could then develop a second resolution that would feed into the council hearing.
So at this point, it's only contemplated that we would be supplying resolutions and testimony, not that we would be sitting as part of any body?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. I wanted that clarification. Because I saw all of a sudden that bodies were sitting, and I thought, wait a minute, there was some potential.
Yes. And I don't really want to say this on the record.
Well, then don't.
Say first
Unless it would make you feel really good.
No.
Order's right there.
Leaning forward.
No.
He's got his hearing aid turned up.
But I think part of it is that because Prince George's County does this as a concurrent process, so that there are many members sitting at a hearing from Prince George's County, and the planning board from Montgomery County does it as a sequential process. So there would be very few representatives at a public hearing from Montgomery County, and I think that there was a desire to have more people sitting at the table during a hearing process.
Okay. So with that precursor to what we're going to do now, we're starting into the process. Prince George's is a little bit ahead of Montgomery County, and you're going to tell us about the preliminary sector plan and what our next steps are.
Okay. For the most part, we found that Montgomery County and Prince George's County have communicated regarding transportation issues, regarding density issues, and so to a great degree, the plans do work together, and there was a great deal of public outreach during the process. Obviously, nothing's perfect, and staff did go through the plan and looked at it in terms of the city's interests in the area, and we noted a few things that we think would benefit the Tacoma-Langley Crossroads area if they were changed. And I think generally what a sector plan does is that, since I think we haven't talked about this in a while, but a sector plan amends the master plan. It can also amend the general plan. And what those are basically the comprehensive plans and affect how properties can be zoned in the future, either through a sector plan process or through an individual property requesting that their property be rezoned. The other thing that it can do is guide how state grant monies are spent in the area and guide how private developers redevelop their property. So we feel it's fairly important, and it also is a great opportunity for us as the area is likely to see some growth in the future, and it's also a great asset currently as it is. So,
could you just say a little bit more about the general plan? That's not a term I'm used to hearing, and
Sure.
if I had to pigeonhole where it fits in the grand scheme of things, I might not get it right. So,
okay, a general plan is at the county level, so it's much more overarching than a master plan. A master plan, the county is broken up into pieces, and both for Montgomery County and Prince George's County, only a smaller area is tackled in a master plan. A sector plan is a very specific area, usually at the level of a town center or several town centers together, but not the size of a master plan. So a sector plan is very detailed, a master plan is more general, and then a general plan might designate where your for example, in Prince George's County, it designates where all your centers are and where your corridors for growth are. And it separates Prince George's County into what's called the developed tier, which is inside the Beltway, the developing tier, which is outside the Beltway, and then the rural tier, which is supposed to be where very little development takes place, sort of like the Ag Preserve. So it's a much broader sweeping type of plan, but it also sets some density targets for different designations inside the plan. So Langley Park is designated as a community center as opposed to a regional center. And the definition for a community center is a center that functions to serve the neighborhood. And when we looked at Langley Park, we really feel that it's a regional center. It may not have a Home Depot. It may not have a Shoppers Food Warehouse. It may not have a giant movie theater. But the types of businesses that are there do serve people who come in from the region for generally more ethnic types of food, like Indian food or Cambodian food, or Latino food, although I think that's a little more pervasive. But there are many businesses that draw people to Langley Park.
Good, that's helpful. Thanks. And that kind of got you into that first point.
Right. Okay. So some of these issues, they're in the sector plan, but they're not clearly discussed. And the public hearing is our opportunity to ask for better language in the sector plan. And so the bike lane is something that honestly came out late in the game, is when the bicycle planners started getting involved in talking about what could occur. And a buffer bike lane is proposed for University Boulevard. Throughout the plan, there are several places where bicycle facilities are discussed. And some places it's called a bike lane, some places it's just called bicycle facility, and then at one point it's actually called a buffered bike lane, but then it says that it should come in within the next 20 years, as opposed to during the construction of the Purple Line, which, everything willing, it may, hopefully would happen before 20 years. And so we would like clearer language on that. One of the things that we've discussed in the past has been the right turning movements. And I know that the Crossroads, both the Tacoma-Langley Crossroads and the X-Roads are well represented here by Erwin Mackin, who would like to speak to this later on. But the right turns are a turning movement that are pretty common in urban areas. And the reason is because in urban areas you have a lot of people walking, you tend to have a lot of buildings, and you can't keep widening the road until you have a 10-foot or 15-lane, 10-lane or 15-lane highway. At a certain point, you have to find other ways to allow people to navigate. And one of the ways is by reducing the turning paces. So if you think of a stoplight as a piece of pie, each lane that goes through, if you're turning, you have one piece of the pie. If you're going straight, you have one piece of the pie. So when you have all your cars going straight or right, you have one light phase. If you have all four legs where you have a straight phase and then you also have a turning phase, then instead of having 4 pieces or 2 pieces, you have 8 pieces. So everybody gets less time. You only have so much time at each light. And one way to change that is to take away your left turn lanes, which means that someone making a turn is going to go right, 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 and then that's how they make their left turn because they'll use their through phase. And it's one way to allow additional density on the sites at the intersection of University and New Hampshire Avenue, assuming that additional density brings more drivers and more cars and puts more pressure on that particular intersection, and that's our problem intersection in this whole area. That's our bad intersection. By eliminating the left turns, that was seen as a more feasible option than an underpass or a traffic circle or an overpass.
It also allows traffic down the middle, too, by the
Right.
purple line itself, right?
Right. But all that was done was a preliminary feasibility study, and State Highway said that wasn't enough. And so what we would like is that this be considered and evaluated whether it is feasible or not feasible before the design on the purple line is finalized. And so we think it's important to move that discussion forward clearly.
Are we talking about, because I've lived in lots of urban areas and I've never seen right turns. So are we talking about turns where the people go the next block and go around, or are we talking about mini clover leaves?
We're talking about where people use the existing street grid, so they would go the next block and then turn and turn and turn. And because
I kind of struggle to see how that works in the crossroads.
with the way that it works.
It's not a street. It's like not like a normal street grid there.
I'm sorry?
It's not like a normal square urban street grid at all. It's not.
It's
like,
actually more circular. It's less square. There's more curvy roads. But in most urban areas, they just prohibit the left turns, and you have to figure it out yourself. And everyone knows, oh, this boulevard, you can't turn left on it. Like when you're on Georgia Avenue, you know there are places you can't turn
Right.
left. In this case, because for the most part there are roads, it wouldn't be that difficult to sign them and say, if you're going left, take the next right.
I guess maybe I don't know the roads behind well enough each
Right.
of those corners, but I don't. I'd like to, I guess, see that because it doesn't really make much sense to me.
Roads on the north side, but I don't think on the south
Yeah.
side. Where are the roads on the south end?
The roads on the south end are on Holton Lane, and then there's an existing functional alley that's not public right away, but people use it as a cut through. And then there's the road behind the Safeway Shopping Center that's on the south side. So there's existing roads, but they would have to change in character in order for this to work. So, I mean, it's not like you can just put up some signs and it would work. But it's, in terms of how to get more growth in this area, it's one of the ways that was more feasible and not thrown out the window.
Underpass is too expensive.
Right. One of the recommendations contained in the Prince George's County Sector Plan was to request park and rides from, and I believe that would be provided by WMATA or by the MTA. And during the design of the Purple Line, park and rides were never discussed, and anytime they came up, everyone affirmed that park and rides were not going to be part of this metro, not metro, but of this. We weren't sure what it was, but now people seem to be going for light rail, but that was not part of the design for the stop, because that would draw more traffic to the location and also create a dead space around the transit stop that would not be retail or sidewalk, and that would just be a parking garage.
Quick question.
Yes.
On the park and ride stuff. As I understand the Purple Line design, it would use a part of the existing, essentially the existing parking lot that's currently there. they would take the restaurant, so-called restaurant, for the transit center itself, and then it would be adjacent to the parking lot. So if you eliminate the park and ride, what will happen is people will just park in that parking lot.
Right.
And we'll have all these merchants who are, you know, ticked off at everybody because there's no park and ride.
Right. And generally, I mean, certainly, I think anytime you put in public transportation or a good public transportation system, it does change how lots are managed and controlled, because there's certainly probably hasn't been that issue where people have been parking in the lots for a long time, but I think it will have to change. As long as there are surface lots that are uncontrolled, then people probably will be parking there. And I think it's a trade-off of having a great transit system, is that people may want to drive and park to it. And so that's, you know, I mean, some jurisdictions, the private landowner might turn over the parking lot to the public, or contract with the public where it becomes a public lot and the public manages it, or the private property owner may, you know, sign it for 4-hour parking or customer-only parking, and then they would hire somebody to monitor the lot. So, but it is certainly an effect of having a good transit system.
I fortunately will be off the council in 20 years, so before 20 years. So I won't have to deal with this, but I wouldn't want to be here for that discussion.
Another issue, and I think this is certainly shared with the Crossroads CDA, is that the language that refers to economic development tends to concentrate very heavily on the Prince George's County side and not be very multi-jurisdictional. So we would like to see that language strengthened. And then finally, one of the issues that our housing office has noticed is that there is no landlord-tenant office. And because we do get calls from folks who live in Prince George's County, we would like to recommend that there be a landlord-tenant office in Prince George's County. And one of the reasons that this came up in this plan is because there was a concern about livability and livability issues, and that the planning staff addressed these issues.
Okay, maybe this is a good point to get Erwin Mack's comments, and I don't know if Lori Kelly wants to come up as well, or and I guess we have 2 letters in the packet, one from the CDA and one from X-Roads, and then Erwin, you have another letter as well, and if you want to just summarize what we need to know from that letter, or all 3 of them, or
in the next 6 or 7 hours, or
Summarize. I know you're capable of that, but we won't be here.
At 8 o'clock,
let me give you the...
At 8 o'clock...
Erwin, excuse me for interrupting. Let me give you the instruction I was given for exactly this task, which was, many years ago I was working for the Congressional Budget Office, and I was going to brief some congressmen, and I was pulled aside and said, okay, here's how it's going to be. Remember that congressman is going to vote on it, and he has 2 minutes before he's going to vote on it. So give him the 3 most important things that he needs to know in order to decide who to vote on it. But you don't have longer than 2 minutes. Now, we're not going to hold you to 2 minutes, but give us the 3 most important things.
At 8 o'clock, my wife turned on the channel to watch the council, and she said, who's that man that's talking about the sector plan? Councilman Robbins. I said, sector plan? I got the agenda from our good city clerk. It said it was at 9 o'clock. Maybe I was screwed up royally, and I rushed, panicked to get down here to find out about the interview change. So that happened earlier. But a couple of things prior to going into this letter, which you will get a copy of. Of course, I did get Ilana a copy. And we are cordial in our relationships. We might disagree on some things that are formal, but never personally. I have never seen anything bring four corners together like the sector plan has. Since 1982, I've been active in that area, and it was a very difficult thing, if not impossible, for the commercial property owners to even talk to each other for fear of revealing secrets and sharing confidential things. Not anymore. While there's still some things that are personal, and they are doing some things that some of them shouldn't be doing without the X-roads, if you will, there is a clear consensus, and the letters you have were based on input from all four corners. So there's nobody left out. The only thing that we agreed not to talk about, because it is so controversial, as you know, is the transit center. And that itself is inflammatory because it's a separate issue. So in summary, in this letter that you will get copies of from Mr. Stanley, Roland Stanley, in answer to a similar letter that we wrote to him that you have in front of you, I only read a couple of 2 or 3 sentences here from it before some other comments. Given the, I'm reading the first paragraph, given the complexities of the plans and the current stage of planning for the Purple Line, your letter raises a number of valid concerns. So they recognize that there are problems that have to be resolved. Similarly, near the bottom of the first page, when you get your copy, you'll find that the Montgomery County sector plan is studying the so-called jug handle plan, whereas Prince George's County is adamant that it has to go in. And our response to that is, at no time will all four corners be obliged to build them simultaneously. So this could be a huge difference in terms of time. If one corner decided to redevelop and put in a so-called jug handle, the other three might not have it for decades.
Is the jug handle the right?
Yes, yes, same idea. And while there are streets that purport to be able to handle jug handle concept, the 95,000 vehicles a day that go through the intersection currently, and certainly not that many making left turns, but thousands in any case, the current street structure is totally inadequate to accommodate those lines. Ilana mentioned the fact that there's an alleyway, dedicated alleyway behind that drops down from Holton Lane. It's not even 20 feet wide, and you would have to totally reconstruct a lot of areas to allow that to be used, for example. Even Holton Lane at the moment is 60 feet wide, brick to brick, and is purported to want to be made to 70 feet wide, which means buildings have to go. So you need to look at this sector plan with a very careful point of view of the people who own the properties, because it's going to make huge differences to the way those current construction pieces are set up. New roadways go through some of them. Some of them have to be modified, and certainly height. Some of the things that have been of interest, of course, is the concept of having retail ground floor and residential second floor. That has some possibilities that would allow for future development of properties in a more responsible way than currently. Probably the thing that has distressed me most in the number of months that we've now been just absolutely I don't know an adequate wording, just overwhelmed with the amount of the work in the sector plan, is the fact that State Highway Administration, Metropolitan Transit Authority, Purple Line, if you will, and the sector plan folks do not agree on a number of significant areas. One of them being street width. And Mr. Stanley refers to the 120-foot right-of-way here, but that's not what some of the others are talking about. And we think that, we know for a fact that the Purple Line currently is being planned at current site plan, meaning whatever exists now is what the Purple Line is going to relate to. It doesn't have any way of knowing what the sector plan is ultimately going to be. So we have questions about the advisability of proceeding so fast, and as Ilana appropriately said, and she and I were talking about this on the phone earlier this morning, There hasn't even been an adequate traffic study made by anyone, State Highway Administration or the sector plan people, about how this is going to be affected based on a lack of traffic study. And that should have been done a long time ago. And there's been public disagreement as to whose responsibility it is and where the money's coming from. And we're going to do what we can to try to help resolve that if that's possible. So our perplexity is the confusion that exists among these giant agencies that bisect us. If anything could have helped earlier, it would have been had current governor appointments continued what one time was the Crossroads Commission when Governor Glendenning was in office. That was the only time we ever had two counties in the city jointly, through all three parties, sitting around a common table talking about public transportation, public safety, immigrant challenges, and health issues. That has never been readopted by consecutive governors, and it needs to be. It's a very, very important issue. So, barring some questions you have, our letters are clear as to the concern. I've expressed some personal observations, preferring to do that rather than be repetitious about a letter that you can take home and read. And we'd be happy to answer questions.
And Lori Kelly, want to add anything?
Well, I'm Executive Director of the Maryland International Corridor CDC, which is a business association on the Prince George's side. And you know, I'm basically here to listen and observe at this point.
One of the troubling things that happened early on, as Alana certainly knows, is that the two counties for the first time ever met in our boardroom a year and a half ago to talk about the future of the sector plan. They had never even sat down at the same table, the same room together. Then they bifurcated. That's become a rotten word because they split. And what was once going to be, as I think you alluded to earlier, was a single track on two counties, and we said, praise the Lord, no, pass the ammunition and all that good stuff doesn't exist anymore. And some of the suggestions that are being made by the Prince George's County side of University Boulevard versus the Montgomery County side of University Boulevard don't match. We already have maps drawn that would show what would happen if the proposals go through. And they're not working together toward resolving that. Worse yet, the purple line is proceeding without regard to what the sector plan is saying. I mentioned that earlier. So there is confusion yet on what really ultimately will happen.
And I guess I'll ask Alana if there's anything we can do that will provide an avenue for any of that disconnect to reconnect.
Right, yeah, and I think part of it is that generally State Highway defers to local agencies to set the agenda. So, and as the sector plan process, there hasn't been a piece of paper that's been adopted by the councils, so they don't really have any direction from the local jurisdictions yet. So everything that's occurred until now has been discussion, pictures, diagrams, drawings, and meetings, which State Highway has certainly participated in, but they're not going to change their direction until there's a definite position from the localities. And so I think, one of the good things about there being a time limit on these processes, which is one of the reasons that they started splitting up and that now we're faced with having to address them fairly quickly and review them fairly quickly, is that they do have to finish their process and take a position, at which point everyone can start to address them. But until now, they've been vetted for feasibility, but not vetted as a policy. Does that make sense?
And not vetted for compatibility.
They're vetted in terms of, there was, for example, one of the plans that was looked at was a couplet, and so the folks from the Purple Line looked at that, which was basically where you would split University Boulevard so you had traffic going one way on one side and another way on another side. And the Purple Line didn't like splitting the road. So there was, they have been participating in the process, but they aren't going to start changing until they know they have to, basically. They'll wait till the end to start shifting course.
While each of the three major groups, SHA, MTA, and the sector plan people defer to each other and refer to each other, there haven't been formal meetings where all three have sat, that is all four actually, sat at the same table at the same time. We've been unable to get them to come together. Got two of them, but not three of them, so that we could get some of this right-of-way straightened out. For example, when you have three different clear numbers of feet for the width of University Boulevard, and there's significant differences, somebody's got to come up with the final answer, and there is no final answer yet.
So is this process, and what we're being asked to consider and vote on tonight, it's an attempt to clarify some of the issues on an ongoing basis. So will we see this again? We're asking for certain amendments and completion of a study and deletion of strategies and so forth. Is this what you and we have come up with to date, and can we expect to see something to further clarify in the future? Not voting on it. No, we're not voting on it, are we?
This resolution will come before you again next week. This resolution is only directed towards Prince George's County, and the hearing is the Prince George's County Planning Board and the council. They'll have a joint hearing, and so where they'll accept testimony. That doesn't mean that there may be another opportunity, for example, before a vote on adoption or transmittal, depending on their processes and how they handle the adoption of the plan.
I guess maybe I'm being a little naive here in how this process works, but I'm hearing that there are a lot of issues and that there are a lot of players and that there's a lot of confusion and there's a lot of areas to clarify.
Right.
And this appears to me as one way to clarify at least what we think are important elements of how things progress. But this is only one point in time, and this process will go for years and years and years. So I'm trying to pull out from you whether this is a part of a strategy that we can see unrolling over time to put in our 2 cents and to try to shape what we think is important. And if so, that's great. I'm just not hearing that there are a lot of words here, and I wasn't quite hearing that clearly so far.
In terms of the right-of-way, there's a few things that are occurring. One is that because there's uncertainty about how University Boulevard will be designed affects how the right-of-way is taken or is granted as easement or whatever from the adjacent property owners. What the design of the streetscape is affects how much land is left over once the Purple Line is developed for redevelopment. So what the actual right-of-way is may vary between counties. And I don't think that they've gotten together and stood up and said, what right-of-way we take is different from what the streetscape is. Because the amount of right-of-way may vary between the county in terms of what they want to take on and what they want as an easement. So along University Boulevard, the boulevard itself may change depending on whether or not there's a platform in the center of it, there's turning lanes.
Yeah.
So what each county has done is set as right-of-way that they feel comfortable with. One of the issues is that the University Boulevard is mainly in Prince George's County. So the right-of-way that they're setting is, depending on who you talk to, it could be totally in Prince George's County or for the most part in Prince George's County. And so that the right-of-way that they would like is the right-of-way that they want to maintain as public right-of-way versus sidewalk that may be on the developer's property or the property owner's property that the developer has to maintain in easement as a public right-of-way. So when property develops in Tacoma Park, that property is going to have to both satisfy Montgomery County's interest in having a streetscape and Prince George's County's interest in having a streetscape. And that's sort of what happens along New Hampshire Avenue. Both counties get an opportunity to comment on during the development process. But things like a buffer bike lane make a difference in terms of what the future of those properties are. And things like the right make a difference in terms of, whether or not you have 2 turning lanes like you do now, as well as the purple line in the center of University. And we know that all of that property is going to be taken from the Tacoma Park side because we can't shift the road towards the transit center. So it all has to shift towards the Safeway property. So those have a big impact on the future, and that's one reason to ask for those types of things to be resolved now. And as each of these are settled through the process, they become more concrete, and there will be more certainty. But right now, there is a lot of uncertainty.
The one certainty that has been determined is that all of University Boulevard from Merrimack through the rest of the city of Tacoma Park is in Prince George's County. Not the median, but it includes all of University Boulevard. No one knows for certainty where the boundary line of the city of Tacoma Park is by the admission of the people in Tacoma Park. There's speculation on where the city line is, but the county is accepted as all of University Boulevard being in Prince George's County. The sector plan also will go all of University Boulevard clear to the power lines past Riggs Road. We determined that at the last meeting. So you're talking about the area of Riggs and University, and down below that, down to the, well, you know where the open line is, where the power lines are.
No, is it beyond the Foot Locker? Are we talking about?
Yes, yes.
Beyond the Foot Locker.
I can't think of the name of the store.
Beyond Value Village.
The old Value Village.
Below Value Village.
Right in there. You'll see the open area where the power lines are.
All right.
So the sector plan does go that far.
Now, you're asking us to provide comment on this resolution, right? I mean, that's what the recommendation.
I'd like you to review it, yes.
Pardon?
Yes, please review it.
And do you want us to comment on it now or by next week? Is that?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So
I'll
are you going to give us some time to comment?
anytime.
Or are you going to? I'm with Ruben on this one.
Neil Teague and I will be back next week with comments based on what we now see is this resolution, which we hadn't seen before.
Are there questions or comments at this point? Then it sounds like anything else that anybody wants to get us between now and next week, and anything that we generate, we should coordinate with Alana ASAP, and we will have a resolution for next week for testimony a week from tomorrow. And who's giving that testimony?
You are?
I thought that might be the answer.
Okay. Sorry, I had to.
And what time is that hearing?
I believe it's in the evening, and I'll get that information.
Okay.
Upper Marlboro.
Yeah.
Neil will be there. We've already signed up. I'll be there. And we're speaking both on behalf of the X Roads, which is the complete intersection, and the CDA as a separate entities.
Good. I'm glad there's nothing on my calendar next Tuesday evening. Okay. Thank you. We're adjourned.